Good morning and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're going to continue where we left off yesterday in our discussion of the Vatican's involvement in China. And this is, it's fortunate, at least for the reading and discussion of this book, that people's attention have been drawn to the conflict in Syria and China and Russia's recent involvement. And I say that there is evidence in this book regarding the influence of the Vatican in China, that China may well be responding to Vatican initiatives in its confrontation with the United States over Syria. So it's important that we comprehend what the book has to say. Now, if you're following along in your own copy of the book, we'll begin in the third full paragraph on page 176. Remember, we were talking about the controversy between the Chinese government and the Vatican over investiture and other human rights issues. And so we continue. He says, if the relationship between these two ancient powers, that is the Vatican, which is ancient, and China, which is even more ancient, sometimes seems hopeless, China and the Holy See have actually found ways to accommodate each other over the years. The Vatican has explicitly disavowed government-appointed bishops, but has tacitly accepted most of them. The Chinese have explicitly outlawed the underground church, but usually turn a blind eye to its members so long as they worship discreetly, much as early American colonies like Maryland turned a blind eye to their quote-unquote Romanists and quote-unquote Papists so long as the offenders kept their religion to themselves. Now, I don't want to be redundant, but I just want to remind the listeners that in the colonial period, the Protestants were well aware of the dangers of Roman Catholicism. They called it the Church of Antichrist, and the Pope was the Antichrist of that church. And it was the greatest of all evils to be feared in any nation, Roman Catholicism. And there was but one Roman Catholic colony. Maryland was named after Mary, the Virgin Mary, and it was to be a Roman Catholic colony, but the overwhelming majority of Protestants in the colonies suppressed Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholics were considered Papists and Romanists. They would never be American. They would always have their first loyalty to the Pope and to their religious cult, and that's exact. You heard me. It's not Christianity by any stretch of the imagination. It's a man-made cult that wraps itself around a pretense of Christianity, but it is a religion that is called universal, and it is rooted in Babylonian mysticism. All right, and the Pope is the head of this. Now, the Bible speaks of it, Revelation chapter 17 and 13 and other places, and a Bible study that I've been attending, we find in the New Testament, many comments made by Christ, eventually forecasting some of the primary characteristics of this Roman Catholic Church. So, I mean, if you still believe Roman Catholicism is Christianity, I beg you to do some of your own research on this subject. So, the Roman Catholic Church in China was largely treated much like Roman Catholicism was treated in the colonies. Roman Catholicism in China, at least from the government's point of view, should be suppressed, or at least the Chinese government should have control over the appointment of the bishops of that Catholic Church. Now it says, the Chinese have made halting moves toward compromise with the Vatican, or rather they were making such moves until a couple of years ago when they abruptly began to backslide. Why this reversal occurred is not clear, but it is part of a recent push in China to restrict freedom in all the nation's recognized religions. In addition to Catholicism, these include Protestantism, Islamism, Buddhism, and Taoism. One recent snapshot of the religious situation in China, the U.S. State Department's 2012 annual report on international religious freedom noted, quote, a marked deterioration during 2011 in the government's respect for and protection of religious rights, unquote. China has ordained at least 4 bishops in defiance of the Vatican since 2012. Again, we're talking about investiture here. The Chinese government wishes to appoint bishops and deny the Vatican any involvement in it. This is understandable given the history of the Roman Catholic Church, especially here in America. It says China has ordained at least 4 bishops in defiance of the Vatican since 2010, all of whom were automatically excommunicated by the Vatican. None of China's bishops are permitted to freely communicate with Rome. Those who resist government control can expect to join a number of Catholic bishops already in jail or otherwise detained. So there is, from Rome's point of view, religious persecution against Roman Catholicism in China. Now it says one such recent detainee is the Reverend Thaddeus Ma Dakin. In the summer of 2012, Reverend Ma celebrated his consecration as auxiliary bishop in Shanghai by immediately announcing his break from the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association. Remember, that's the wing of the Roman Catholic Church in China, which is bifurcated. There are 2 Roman Catholic churches in China. One accepts the authority of the government over that church, and the other church, which is called the underground church, accepts only the authority of the papacy, and they are forced underground to worship because of government persecution. And it says he was immediately taken away by authorities and placed under house arrest in a seminary where he apparently remains today. So an open defection from the official government-sponsored Roman Catholic Church got him in trouble, got him in prison by the government. He says there will doubtless be more such incidents ahead as Vatican-China relations develop. As the political scientists Ronald Engelhardt and Christian Welzel have noted in their scholarship on modernization and democracy, a China that tends to join the modern world as a knowledge society, a quote-unquote knowledge society, whatever that means, is a nation that will have to embrace a more open society sooner or later. Okay? This is obviously a reference to China's isolationism, and it's being aloof from the rest of the world and does pretty much as it pleases. And the Vatican, of course, if you understand and believe what I've been saying and what this author's been reiterating here on Inquisition Update in this book, if there's going to be a global government, the Chinese government can no longer remain aloof. It has to join the community of nations under papal authority. So this is a war for China. This is a war for the control of China. The Vatican is actually challenging the government of China over control. Now, we're going to talk about this specifically later on. The author's going to comment about this himself. So, if it says, a China that intends to join the modern world which is the Roman world, as a quote-unquote knowledge society, unquote, is a nation that will have to embrace a more open society sooner or later. Knowledge societies cannot function effectively without highly educated publics that have become increasingly accustomed to thinking for themselves. In other words, thinking contrary to their governments. Okay? You can just see the Jesuits working in this if you've been following along. He says, furthermore, rising levels of economic security bring a growing emphasis on a syndrome of self-expression values, one that gives high priority to free choice and motivates political action. Now, obviously, if you're talking about free choice, if the Vatican's talking about free choice, it is speaking specifically about freedom to be Catholic. All right? And it mentions in the same breath political action, which is the very strength of the Roman Catholic Church. I'm going to repeat myself again. The Roman Catholic Church doesn't proselytize by going door to door like the Seventh-day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses. No, you never see a frocked priest on the street going house to house inviting people to come to the Roman Catholic Church. That's not how Catholics are made. Catholics are made by the government, by the civil laws. You see, the Vatican gets control in politics and then organizes the laws of the land, gets involved in politics. Listen to me carefully. The Roman Catholic Church is principally involved in politics. Why? Because it's through the civil law that they conform every living creature to become subject to the Roman pontiff. Okay? The civil laws of the land are just Roman Catholic canon law written on different paper and using different words, but the effect is the same, to make every person conform to a system that is compatible with Roman Catholicism. All right? So political action is the all in all of Vatican, the Vatican's effort to Catholicize any nation. First, get control of the government. That's what they've done in the United States. That's obviously what they're attempting to do in China. That's what they've done throughout its history. That's how you are being made Catholic. Without your knowledge, you are forced to conform to Roman Catholic canon law through the civil laws of the land. Okay, the entire system of the United States is designed to make you subject to the Roman pontiff, because the state is the servant of the church. That's Roman Catholic canon law. If a state does not serve the Roman Catholic Church, then it is a government de facto. It may be a government in fact, but it's not a government de jure. Okay, that means it is not have communion with the Roman Catholic Church. It's a rebel government. The Vatican considers China a rebel government. It won't allow the Pope to run the church. The Vatican early on in the colonial period considered America a de facto government because it was run by Protestants. Okay, so then we had the Civil War. Okay, that separated the colonies from Protestant Great Britain, and that gave religious liberty to Catholics. Okay, that was just the first step in Catholicizing the government by getting control of the government. All right. First of all, they had to achieve religious liberty for Catholics. Roman Catholicism was suppressed in the colonies and through the Revolutionary War, and then compounded by the Civil War. Amendments were made to the Constitution that virtually enslaved us all. Remember, It is absolutely essential for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. If you want to know what's going on in China, all you have to do is study how Rome got control of the government in this country. And we've covered it many times on Inquisition Update. It'll be a constant reference here at Inquisition Update, and you simply must know the Vatican's machinations in China are going to be similar. One of the first things Rome does in order to get control is to get that nation, that target nation, that mission nation, that nation that the Vatican considers a missionary field, to become Roman Catholic, is to indebt that nation beyond its ability to pay. So they foment wars, costly wars, that cost in treasure and cost in spirit and cost in every way, and bring the nation to distress financially, and then through the Jesuit financiers finance these wars, and then the nation becomes a slave to its creditor. Okay? And this may be what's going on right now with China's involvement in Syria, is to indebt China to a costly war. This is all because the Vatican is going to have a new world order. It's going to rule this world, and China is a recalcitrant nation and needs to be brought into the family of nations, and since she won't come willingly, she's got to come forcibly. And so now she's involved in a mess in Syria with the United States, and we're all falling for the old trap that's been used over and over and over again. When will the world ever wake up? It's important that you know what role the Jesuits play in the world in fomenting wars to get nations indebted beyond their abilities to pay. And this is the very nature of the Jesuits. Now it says, furthermore, rising levels of economic security bring a growing emphasis on a syndrome of self-expression values, one that gives high priority to free choice and motivates political action. After a certain point, accordingly, it becomes difficult to avoid democratization because repressing mass demands for more open societies becomes increasingly costly and detrimental to economic effectiveness. So this the author is plainly telling you here that the fight to remain aloof from the rest of the nations is eventually going to become extremely costly for China. You're listening to the American ambassador to the Holy See. He's telling you flat out, China can't afford it. China's either going to come voluntarily, or we're going to bury her in debt. That's how Rome works. That's how Rome worked in the United States. That's how she's working in China. All right, it says currently an estimated 12 million Catholics live in China. Though a tiny fraction of the country's 1.3 billion population, it is a large number nonetheless, and likely to get larger. The Vatican wants to be there when the time comes for more religious freedom in China. Pope Benedict has expressed a desire to tighten ties to the Chinese Catholic community, both underground and government sanctioned. The Chinese government has its own reasons for eventually making peace with the Roman Catholic Church. As the Beijing-based Italian journalist and Sino-Vatican expert Francisco Sissi has observed, a spiritual vacuum opened in China after the flaws of Mao and his version of communism were officially acknowledged. Into this vacuum flooded numerous faiths and cults. Here the Jesuits are involved again. He says, into this vacuum flooded numerous faiths and cults, some of which, like Falun Gong, are now deemed threats by the Chinese government. So how does Rome get the Chinese government to warm up to Roman Catholicism, since it can't suppress religion, the practice of Roman Catholicism in the country? The Jesuits simply insert all kinds of cults and religious institutions that will war with the government, to cause trouble for the government. And then, by contrast, the Roman Catholic Church looks like a stable religious institution that it ought to chummy up with in order to maintain control. You see, that's what Washington's all about. Chummying up with the Vatican in order to maintain control. Take advantage of the power asserted by the Roman Catholic Church by joining it. That's what's going on. That's what ecumenism is all about. That's what Vatican Council II was all about. Not to just bring the Protestants back to the Roman Catholic Church and become subject to the Roman Pontiff, but to show the government that now that the Roman Catholic Church has gobbled up the Protestant churches back into its fold, it now has a political majority, a vast political majority, that Washington and the politicians that survive on the public dole in Washington, if they want to stay on the public dole, if they want to maintain their power, prestige, and authority, they must embrace the Roman Catholic Church and her ecumenical evangelibellies, because they have a political mandate. So the same thing, the same dynamics are working in China. Now he says Beijing may have originally miscalculated the destabilizing potential of these new religions, these cults, neglecting their spread as it sought control of older, more traditional religions like Roman Catholicism. The Chinese eventually came to realize, apparently, that, here it is, here's the punchline, that Catholicism has the virtue of being an established and stable faith, as well as Western and modern, without being driven by an explicitly political agenda. So what the Vatican through the Jesuits inserts all these cults that put a political threat on the government, and then the government looks at the Roman Catholic Church and says, well, the whore from Rome ain't all that bad after all, right? There's how ecumenism works. All right, eventually, the Chinese government is likely to appreciate the positive dynamic that Archbishop Magliore identified to me as the source of the church's soft power. Okay, that was a demonstration of the church's soft power. Catholicism is a great social binding force, and then see the value in promoting it. There you go. Make Roman Catholicism seem like the greatest of all socially binding force. You want to unite the people, you back the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church unites people. If people are your power, then you have to be on the side of the majority. And Rome is expert at displaying herself as the majority social power in any nation. And so the implication is clear. Rome has put forward the ultimatum: you either side with us or you're going down in smoke. Okay? And again, I make reference to China's recent involvement in Syria against the United States. Push is coming to shove. The Vatican is never going to relinquish China to remain aloof and separate from the rest of the world when she claims divine right to rule the entire world and every human creature in it. So China's got to come along one way or another. And if soft power doesn't work, hard power will mop it up. Okay, it's going to be very expensive for China. It's going to be very expensive for the United States, but Rome stands to do nothing but win when the nations become indebted to the Vatican financiers that rule this world. We'll be back right after the messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you wish to contact me directly, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, I've put forward to you the very real strategy that the Vatican is using to force the government of China to warm up to Roman Catholicism and see Catholicism not any longer as a threat, but as a stabilizing force in the nation. Okay? They just inject a bunch of destabilizing cults, religious cults in China. And all of a sudden, the Chinese government is forced to look once again at Catholicism and how it unites the people, and that it is a stable religion. And by contrast to these destabilizing cults, is a better choice for the Chinese government to make. Okay? That's how you make a government Catholic. It works. It worked right here in America, too. Isn't it interesting that about the time of Vatican Council II, we had Islamists becoming more and more prevalent in the United States. Now, after Vatican Council II, we're here in the 21st century now, they're demanding caliphates. They're demanding, that mosques be built, and that the Muslim prayers be heard all over the country, and that Sharia law should be instituted. And what effect does that have? Well, to drive the Protestants back to the Roman Catholic Church. Because the Protestants recognize the power and influence of the Roman Catholic Church, and that to stave off this threat, this destabilizing force called radical Islam, all of the Christians, no matter what color they are, Catholic, see, they think Catholicism is Christianity. So Catholicism, Methodism, Presbyterianism, Baptists, and Seventh-day Adventists, and all of them should unite against this horde. Works for Vatican Council too, doesn't it? It works for ecumenism. Here's another example. Same-sex marriage, they call it. I call it what the Bible calls it, sodomite marriage. We don't want to bring the Bible into this, obviously, because the Roman Catholic Church doesn't base its religion on the Bible. So they got to call it something else. So they call it same-sex marriage. Well, one thing that all quote-unquote Christians agree on is that sodomy is a sin, and that marriage should never be allowed between sodomites. And the Roman Catholic Church is on our side on this. So we can unite with the Roman Catholic Church to stave off this sodomite marriage, same-sex marriage. See, it works. Catholics and Protestants together. Now they're under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. They've got control of politics in Washington. They've got control of the Supreme Court. They've had their Pope come and preach to our legislators. Do you see where this is all going? America's becoming Catholic, just like China is becoming Catholic. The same strategies being used in China to Catholicize China are the same strategies used right here in the United States today, right here, this day, in front of your face, and no one from the mainstream media is uttering a word about it. And if it weren't for Inquisition Update and just a handful of others on the alternative to the alternative medias, you would never hear about it. But America's Catholic now. Maybe not willingly, just by default. Is that okay with you? It's not okay with Inquisition Update. Okay? have no fellowship with the unfruitful workness of darkness. No fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. I choose to reprove them, to expose them, and to denounce them as Antichrist. We shouldn't negotiate with the terrorists called Roman Catholicism. It is Roman Catholicism that has brought these destabilizing threats to this country in order to gain control of this country. They did it here. They're doing it in China. They're doing it all over the world. And it's working simply because we have forgotten the greatest of all evils to be feared in every land. We have forgotten our Protestant heritage. We have given up the protest. The Bible says he wear down the saints, wear out the saints. That's what he's done. He's worn out the saints. Deluded them, pacified them, and now is on the verge of annihilating them, if not physically, spiritually. We can't serve two masters. We cannot profess Jesus with our mouths and serve the Antichrist with our hands and our feet. We've got to take a stand. We've got to take a stand. He says how the relationship will evolve, that is, the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, rather, the papacy, more specifically, and the Chinese government. It says how the relationship will evolve remains unclear, but it's likely to be interesting, says the author. As noted earlier in this book, the Holy See and China diplomacy share a long-term, far-sighted perspective. In his recent book on China, Dr. Henry Kissinger, a papal knight, if you don't already know it, many of you do, Dr. Henry Kissinger quotes Deng Xiaoping's 24-character message to the Chinese people as he neared retirement in 1997. Quote, "Observe carefully, secure our position, cope with affairs calmly, hide our capacities, and bide our time. Be good at maintaining a low profile and never claim leadership," unquote. Deng's wisdom, described by Kissinger as invoking China's quote-unquote ancient virtues and instructing his people, quote, not to evoke unnecessary fears by excessive assertiveness, unquote, has resonance in any consideration of the evolving future of the church in China and its potential diplomatic challenges. If the Vatican opens diplomatic relations with China, it will insist that the underground church fold into the official church, a move many underground Catholics will resist. Meanwhile, Taiwan, long a Catholic stronghold in Asia, will probably see its relationship with the Vatican suffer. Indeed, the Vatican has hinted that it would be willing to end diplomatic relations with Taiwan if doing so would help it reach an agreement with China. This issue was raised during my confirmation hearing, says the author, when a senator asked whether there was any truth in the rumor that the Vatican was considering moving its nunciature, the papal nuncio, from Taiwan to the mainland. I responded that any potential change in the Holy See's diplomatic representation in China would involve an expansion or return to the mainland, but would not be an abandonment of Taiwan. See, Rome never gives anything away, right? He says some local Taiwan Catholic groups were not convinced by my words and wrote me stinging letters to tell me so. Their anger was a good reminder of the delicacy of the situation. The Holy See will have a diplomatic challenge on several fronts if or when a more formal diplomatic arrangement is taken with China. For the immediate future, it appears the relations will stay more or less as they are. That is, unless Rome can destabilize the Chinese government by getting them involved in a global war over Syria. All right? He says, for the immediate future, it appears that relations will stay more or less as they are. This was confirmed when I met Archbishop Claudio Celli not long after President Bush's visit to China. Archbishop Celli was Undersecretary for Relations with States. Remember, we talked about that earlier. And it was him that Ambassador Milady handed President George H.W. Bush's letter prior to the first Iraq War, and had since become the Secretary of the Administration of Patrimony of the Apostolic See, the agency that oversees Vatican properties. A leading expert on China within the Vatican, Celli had recently gone to China for back-channel negotiations with the government. The Chinese officials he met showed little willingness to concede church control to the Vatican. In fact, negotiations went so poorly that at one point, Celli threatened to pack his bags and leave. He stayed, but little progress was made. Quote, China is like a bird cage, unquote, Archbishop Celli told me, describing the church's freedom of action in China. Quote, the bird can fly, but not far. Sometimes the cage expands, and sometimes it narrows, but the cage is still a cage, unquote. So the Roman Catholic Church is, not at liberty in China. And the Vatican has to do something about it. Because when the Roman Catholic Church is not free in China, the papacy is not free to govern the church. And that makes the government of China a de facto government. Does it not? So they're going to teach China a lesson. And guess who's going to be called upon to do that little nasty deed for the Vatican? The United States of America, that once protested this monster in Rome. Now, part 4 of the chapter continues. He says, the month after President Bush's visit to China, December 2005, brought not only our first Christmas in Rome, but the 40th anniversary of Dignitatis Humanae, the Vatican Council II Declaration on Religious Freedom that was promulgated on December 7, 1965. We recognized the anniversary by organizing a panel discussion and reception to highlight the First Amendment, the role of the American Church in the American Roman Catholic Church, together with her ecumenical evangelibellies, in promoting interfaith dialogue. That's the uniting force of the Roman Catholic Church, interfaith dialogue, and acceptance of other faiths. That's what ecumenism truly means, is the unification of all the world's religions under the authority of the papacy, so that every living creature may be subject to the Roman pontiff. And of course, the teachings of Dignitatis Humanae, the dignity of the human being. That's what Rome's going to do, going to base all of her ecumenical movement in the world to unite all the world's religions under one religious, political, and social and economic authority, the papacy itself, and it's going to use the dignity of the human person as the calling card. Okay? Everybody wants their rights, right? So the Vatican's going to be the authority on human rights, just as it insisted that it has been all its life, the entire history of the papacy. Now, speakers include Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who addressed the topic of religious freedom with reflections of his personal experiences in China, Bosnia, and throughout the world. Scott Appleby of the Kruk Peace Institute at the University of Notre Dame, who summarized the evolution of the United States' view of religious freedom, and Jim Towie, the director of President Bush's White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, who examined the First Amendment's protection of religion. Okay, we're talking about the Constitution now. He says they were all great talks, and this last one particularly sticks with me. Towie pointed out that the language of the religion clause of the First Amendment, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, unquote, contains two equally important ideas. The first, articulated in the Establishment Clause, is that Congress may not back, create, or favor any religion. Okay? So this ought to make the Protestants just outraged, right? You don't hear it, do you? Not one whimper. He says this is the part that everybody seems to grasp. Separation of church and state. Less well understood is what comes after the comma. The Free Exercise Clause, which tells us that Congress cannot discourage any religion by, quote, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, unquote. This is the phrase that some people, particularly those of a secular bent, often gloss over. The founders were clearly stating that government cannot prevent religious practitioners from living in accord with their faith. In stressing this second part in his talk for our panel, Towie anticipated actions that would be taken by the Obama administration 5 years later to force Catholic and other religious institutions in the United States to pay for forms of health care such as birth control and pregnancy termination that contradict fundamental Catholic beliefs, not to mention the explicit intent of the Bill of Rights. Another important incident I recall well from that December was a meeting with Archbishop Leonardo Sandri, at the time the Sostituto, essentially the number 3 man at the Vatican, who was very knowledgeable about Latin American affairs. A native Argentinian, he had served as nuncio to Venezuela between 1997 and 2000 during the rise of Hugo Chavez. Chavez went on to distinguish himself as the most difficult leader in Latin America since Fidel Castro, spouting anti-American rhetoric, ignoring the international agreements on narcotics trafficking, and using Venezuelan oil profits to fund dissension throughout the region. Archbishop Sandri told me that he believed Chavez could be, quote, dangerous, unquote, but he thought it unlikely that the church would speak too loudly against him. Quote, the Holy See continues to feel that a non-confrontational approach to Chavez is the right strategy for the time being, unquote, we later explained in a cable to the State Department. But, quote, the Vatican hierarchy is under no illusions about the danger of Chavez and kindred souls, unquote. Hugo Chavez was a problem we would come back to many times over the next months and years. Even today, following his death in March 2013, Chavez casts a long shadow over Latin America. Now, I'm not going to speak much about Chavez, but interesting, the Roman Catholic Church seeming to embrace the First Amendment to the Constitution, the non-establishment clause, and the freedom of religion clause, and taking the language from the Constitution to insist that Catholics are to be allowed full religious freedom. Now, Tom Fress, on the other hand, Inquisition Update, likes to use his religious freedom to expose the diabolical heart and soul of the Roman Catholic Church. Do you think I'm going to have the same freedom to practice my religion as the Roman Catholics do? Listen, if history is any indication, they're going to silence me on First Amendment radio just like they silenced me on ham radio. Religious liberty from the Vatican's point of view, despite all of her public hyperbole, is about religious liberty for Catholics. Any religion that claims itself to be the one true religion and that its leader is the vicar or the replacement of the Son of God on earth is the religion to be feared. The Protestants understood this when they were Protestant. Where is Protestantism today? It doesn't matter what our Constitution says, as long as there is a supermajority of Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court whose very purpose it is to interpret the Constitution of the United States. It is that interpretation, that Roman Catholic interpretation of the Constitution, that is going to give religious liberty to Catholics and deny the same to me and you, if you are a protester. Justice Scalia was quoted as saying, the Constitution of the United States is a living document, a quote-unquote living document. Isn't that the same thing the Vatican has always said about the Bible? And that just like every living creature, it develops. It changes over time. And that's why this country is flooded from coast to coast and border to border. The Bible is perverted all over this world. Heretical forms of the Bible are now considered the Word of God in the Christian world. And the one true Bible for English-speaking people is considered a dead letter. They've flooded the world's market with debauched Bibles. Bibles that cannot in any way, shape, or form be considered the Word of God. Changed in its very substance. And if they think the Bible, and after you've seen and realized with your own eyes what Rome has done to destroy what she calls a living book, then you must know what Justice Scalia's intent was when he said the Constitution is a living book. They are going to bastardize the Constitution of the United States. They are going to change the meaning. They're going to change the content. They're going to change the interpretation of the Constitution of the United States till it won't even resemble the original. What you saw them do to the Bible, they fully intend to do to the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States is going to be interpreted from a Catholic, or rather a papal, point of view. And if you want to know what that point of view is, all you have to do is read Pope Pius IX's encyclical and Syllabus of Error of 1864. You're either going to go along with the Pope's New World Order willingly, or you're going to do it by force. If the soft power doesn't achieve the diabolical end that the papacy, the Antichrist of the Bible, intends for you and your family and your posterity, then force will be applied. And it will be the American government, or it will be a UN coalition, or maybe it will even be China and Russia and Iran. But you're going to come to the New World Order kicking or screaming. That's what the Pope intends. He's going to rule this world with a rod of Roman iron, claiming all the while to be the vicar, the replacement of the Son of God on earth. And you've got to know, after reading and understanding this book, This Roman Catholic is admitting that the Vatican, no, he's boasting that the Vatican controls this government. Are you ready to protest? Maybe here at Inquisition Update we should get some ancient Protestant works to read and find out what made the protesters Protestants. Maybe they were right. The greatest of all evils to be feared in every land. Satan's vicar, the vicar of Christ. Isn't that amazing? We'll be back tomorrow on Inquisition Update.